The drawing room doors opened, and Vesna Holloway was pushed inside. Not guided, not escorted. Pushed. Her father's hand pressed flat against the small of her back, propelling her forward like unwanted cargo. She stumbled, catching herself on the doorframe, cheeks burning. 20 people turned to look at her. No, not 20. It only felt like 20. There were 6, maybe 7, arranged around the room in various poses of aristocratic boredom. But only one pair of eyes held her attention. Only one gaze made her skin prickle with something she could not name. Lord Calder Ashbourne, the Duke of Thornhaven, stood by the fireplace. He did not sit. He did not smile. He simply watched her entrance with the detached interest of a man observing an insect crawl across his breakfast plate. This is a mistake, Vesna thought. There has been a terrible mistake. Your Grace, her father said, voice oiled with false warmth. May I present my daughter? Vesna. The pause before her name was deliberate, the slight emphasis on the word daughter, as if clarifying that yes, this was indeed a daughter, though perhaps not the one anyone had expected. Because Vesna was not supposed to be here. Fenella was supposed to be here. Beautiful Fenella, with her golden hair and her perfect manners and her laugh like silver bells. Fenella, who had been groomed since childhood for exactly this moment, this alliance, this duke. Fenella, who had fled in the night with a horsemaster's son. The scandal had erupted 3 days ago. Lady Bellamy Holloway had taken to her bed with smelling salts and theatric weeping. Lord Renwick Holloway had raged for hours, then gone terribly quiet, and Vesna had been summoned from the forgotten corner of the house where she usually lived, dragged from her books and her solitude, and informed that she would be taking her sister's place. You will do, her father had said. Not a compliment. A verdict. And now here she was, standing in the Duke of Thornhaven's London residence, wearing her sister's dress because her own were deemed too shabby, her hair pinned too tightly, her lungs refusing to draw proper breath. The Duke had still not spoken. He was tall. That was the first thing she noticed. Tall and dark, and built like something carved from winter itself. His hair was black, almost blue-black in the firelight. His jaw could have cut glass. And his eyes, a pale silver that seemed to hold no warmth whatsoever, moved over her with slow, clinical precision, assessing, cataloging, finding her wanting. Vesna lifted her chin. If he was going to reject her, she would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her cower. Your Grace, she said, and her voice came out steadier than she felt. I apologize for the confusion regarding today's meeting. I understand this arrangement was not what you expected. Something stirred in those winter-colored eyes. Interest? Irritation? She could not tell. No, he said finally. His voice was low, dark, and resonant. It was not. Her father stepped forward, hands spread in supplication. Your Grace, I assure you, Vesna is equally suitable for the arrangement we discussed. She is well-read, accomplished in household management, and perfectly capable of fulfilling the duties required of a duchess. The matter of her sister's unfortunate departure is a temporary scandal that will fade with time. The alliance between our families remains advantageous to all parties. Vesna wanted to sink through the floor. She was being sold like livestock, her qualities listed as if she were a horse at auction. Well-read, accomplished, capable, not beautiful, not charming, not beloved, just capable, just sufficient. The Duke's gaze had not left her face. She felt it like a physical weight. What did he see when he looked at her? The wrong daughter? The lesser choice? The desperate offering of a disgraced family scrambling to salvage an alliance? Leave us, the Duke said. Lord Renwick blinked. I beg your pardon. Leave. Us. The Duke did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The command in those 2 words was absolute. "I wish to speak with Miss Holloway alone." "That is highly improper. She is an unmarried woman, and you are not yet officially engaged. I cannot simply abandon my daughter to a private audience without chaperonage." "You abandoned her the moment you pushed her through that door in her sister's dress, hoping I would not notice the difference." The Duke's tone was mild, pleasant even, but his eyes were ice. "I noticed. Now leave, or I will have my footman assist you." Lady Bellamy made a strangled sound. Lord Renwick's face mottled purple, then white. But he left. They all left, filing out in uncomfortable silence until the doors clicked shut, and Vesna was alone with a man she did not know, in a house she had never visited, wearing a dress that did not belong to her. The silence stretched like a blade. "Sit down," the Duke said. "You look like you are about to faint." "I am not going to faint." "Then sit down, because you are making my neck hurt looking up at you from this angle." She blinked. Was that sarcasm? From the man known throughout London as the coldest Duke in England? She sat. The settee was velvet, expensive, uncomfortable. She perched on its edge, spine rigid, hands folded in her lap. The Duke remained standing. He studied her for another long moment, and Vesna forced herself to hold his gaze, to not look away, to not show the terror clawing at her chest. "You are not Fenella," he said finally. "Obviously. You are not beautiful like Fenella." The words should have hurt. They did hurt. But Vesna had spent 23 years hearing variations of this theme. She was well practiced at hiding the wound. "No," she agreed. "I am not. You are not charming like Fenella. You do not simper or flutter or perform the pretty courtesies that make men feel important. No. Your father tells me you are well-read, that you have opinions, that you once argued with a viscount about agricultural reform at a dinner party and made him look like a fool." Vesna felt heat creep up her neck. That was 3 years ago, and he was a fool. His ideas about crop rotation would have starved half of Somerset. The corner of the Duke's mouth twitched, just slightly, just enough for her to notice. "I'll take her," he said. Vesna's heart stopped. "What?" "I'll take her." He turned to the window, clasping his hands behind his back. "You. I will take you. The arrangement stands. Inform your father the wedding will take place in 1 month. But—" Her voice failed her. She tried again. "But why?" He glanced at her over his shoulder. Those pale eyes revealed nothing. "Because I have no interest in a wife who simpers," he said quietly. "And I have even less interest in a woman who would run away with a horsemaster's son the moment she found the arrangement inconvenient." He crossed to the door, pulling it open. "Welcome to your new life, Miss Holloway." And then he was gone, leaving Vesna alone in that enormous room, with the fire crackling and her pulse racing and a single question burning in her mind. What had she just agreed to? Thornhaven was not a house. It was a declaration of war against warmth itself. Vesna pressed her forehead to the carriage window, watching the estate emerge from the mist like a creature rising from deep water. Gray stone, black windows, towers that stabbed the sky like accusations. The grounds were immaculate, yes, but in the way a mausoleum is immaculate. Nothing was out of place because nothing dared to be. The carriage had been traveling for 6 hours. 6 hours of silence, because the Duke had not accompanied her. He had departed London 3 days earlier, leaving her to follow with a maid she did not know and a mountain of trunks containing clothes she had not chosen. Her mother had supervised the packing with unusual enthusiasm. For the first time in Vesna's life, Lady Bellamy had paid attention to her wardrobe. It did not feel like love. It felt like preparation for a sale. Miss Holloway, the maid, a severe woman named Mrs. Corvin spoke without looking at her. "We will arrive in 10 minutes. You should compose yourself." "I am composed." "You have bitten your thumbnail to the quick. The Duke dislikes visible anxiety." Vesna looked down at her hands. The maid was right. She tucked her fingers beneath her cloak. "What else does the Duke dislike?" she asked. Mrs. Corvin's expression did not change. "Disorder, tardiness, unnecessary conversation, excessive emotion, questions about his past, visitors who arrive unannounced, dogs in the house, the color yellow." Yellow? His late mother preferred it. He had every yellow item removed from the estate after her passing. Vesna absorbed this information carefully. A man who purged an entire color from his home because of its association with his mother. What did that suggest about his feelings? Grief too vast to bear? Or something colder? She did not ask. Mrs. Corvin had already made clear that questions about the Duke's past were unwelcome. The carriage rolled through iron gates and up a drive lined with bare-limbed trees. Servants stood at attention on the front steps, a perfect line of them, faces blank as the stone walls behind them. No smiles, no warmth, just efficiency. This is my home now, Vesna thought. The realization sat in her stomach like a stone. The carriage stopped. A footman opened the door. Mrs. Corvin descended first, then turned to offer her hand. Vesna took it, stepping onto the gravel drive, feeling terribly small against the enormity of the house. The Duke was not there to greet her. Of course he was not. Why would he be? She was a transaction, not a treasure, a solution to a problem, not a beloved bride. This way, Miss Holloway. Mrs. Corvin was already moving toward the doors. I will show you to your rooms. The Duke has requested that you join him for supper at 8. That gives you 3 hours to rest and dress. 3 hours. As if she could rest in this place. The interior of Thornhaven was exactly what she expected. Grand. Cold. Impeccable. The floors gleamed, the chandeliers sparkled, and everywhere, that same oppressive silence, as if the house itself was holding its breath. Her rooms were in the east wing, a sitting room, a bedchamber, a dressing room. The furniture was beautiful and impersonal. The view from the window showed a formal garden, hedges trimmed into geometric perfection, not a single flower daring to bloom out of season. Is there anything you require, Miss Holloway? Vesna turned from the window. Mrs. Corvin stood by the door, hands clasped. Information, Vesna said. I require information. About the Duke, about what he expects from this arrangement, about why he chose me when he could have simply walked away from the alliance entirely. Something shifted in Mrs. Corvin's expression. Just briefly. The Duke's reasons are his own, Miss Holloway. I suggest you ask him directly if you wish to know them. And if he refuses to answer, then you will have learned something about him nonetheless. The door clicked shut. Vesna was alone. She stood in the center of that beautiful, lifeless room, and for the first time since her father had pushed her through those drawing room doors, she let herself feel the full weight of her situation. She was to marry a man she did not know, a man who had chosen her for reasons he refused to explain, a man whose household ran on silence and whose estate felt more like a prison than a home. And she had agreed to this, had stood there and said nothing when he declared he would take her, had climbed into the carriage and traveled 6 hours without protest, had let herself be delivered to this place like a parcel. Why? Because the alternative was returning to Holloway House, to parents who had never wanted her, to a life in the shadows of her sister's disgrace, to 20 more years of being the wrong daughter, the difficult one, and the one who argued about crop rotation and made viscounts look like fools. At least here, she thought grimly, I will be unwanted by someone new. A knock at the door interrupted her brooding. A young maid entered, barely more than 16, with red hair and nervous eyes. "Miss Holloway, I am Bridget. I have been assigned as your lady's maid. Shall I draw a bath before supper?" "Yes, thank you." The girl bobbed a curtsy and disappeared into the dressing room. Water began to run. Steam drifted through the doorway. Vesna sat on the edge of the bed and stared at nothing. She thought about running. For just a moment, she let herself imagine it. Climbing out the window, finding the stables, taking a horse and riding until Thornhaven was nothing but a memory. But where would she go? She had no money of her own, no friends who would shelter her, no skills except the ability to argue about agricultural reform and make powerful men uncomfortable. Besides, Fenella had already run. Look where that had gotten her. Last anyone heard, she and her horsemaster were living in a rented room somewhere in Yorkshire, scrubbing floors to pay for bread. Vesna was many things, but she was not romantic enough to find poverty charming. No, she would stay. She would marry the cold Duke of Thornhaven, and she would discover why he had chosen her, even if it took years to unearth the truth. The bath helped. Bridget washed her hair with lavender soap and chattered nervously about the estate, the village, the upcoming harvest festival. It was the first genuine conversation Vesna had heard since arriving. "The Duke is a good master," Bridget said carefully, working a comb through Vesna's wet hair. "Fair, never cruel, but he does not smile often. I have worked here 2 years, and I have seen him smile perhaps 3 times. What made him smile?" Bridget hesitated. "Once when his horse won a race, once when the old gardener told a joke, and once when he received a letter. I do not know who it was from, but he read it by the fire in his study, and when he finished, he smiled. Then he burned it. A letter he smiled at, and then destroyed." Another piece of the puzzle, but Vesna could not see where it fit. She dressed for supper in a gown of deep green silk, one of the few her mother had packed that did not make her feel like a child playing dress-up. Bridget pinned her hair simply, away from her face. "You look well, miss," Bridget said, stepping back to assess her work. Vesna looked at herself in the mirror. Well, not beautiful, not elegant, but well, it would have to do. The clock struck 8. A footman appeared to escort her to the dining room. Vesna followed him through corridors she did not yet know, past paintings of stern ancestors and vases of white flowers, until they reached a set of double doors. The footman knocked twice, then opened them. The Duke was already seated at the head of a table long enough to seat 30. He did not rise when she entered. He simply watched her approach, tracking her every step. "Miss Holloway," he said, "you are precisely on time." "I was told you dislike tardiness." "I do. I also dislike excessive punctuality. It suggests anxiety." "Then what would you prefer? That I arrive at random intervals to keep you guessing?" Silence. Then, so brief she almost missed it, that twitch at the corner of his mouth. "Sit down," he said. "The soup is getting cold." Vesna sat. The chair was too large for her, the table too wide, the distance between them too vast for comfortable conversation. A footman materialized to ladle soup into her bowl. She waited until the Duke lifted his spoon before lifting her own. They ate in silence, 1 course, 2, 3. The food was excellent. The wine was better. And still, not a word passed between them. Finally, Vesna set down her fork. "Is this how our marriage will be?" she asked. "Sitting in silence across an endless table, eating food that grows cold before we can taste it?" The Duke's spoon paused halfway to his mouth. "What would you prefer?" "Conversation. Occasionally. Perhaps about something more substantial than the weather." "Very well." He set down his spoon. "Let us have a conversation. Why did you agree to this marriage?" The question hit her like a slap, because I had no choice. Everyone has a choice, Miss Holloway. Your sister proved that quite dramatically. My sister had a horse master who loved her. I have nothing. No suitors, no prospects, no one willing to rescue me from my circumstances. So you came here expecting to be rescued? No. She met his eyes directly. I came here expecting to survive. Rescue was never an option. He studied her for a long moment. Then he picked up his wine glass and leaned back in his chair. You are very honest, he said quietly. You dislike excessive emotion. I assumed that included false ones. I do. Then you will have no complaints about my honesty. I may not be beautiful or charming or any of the things Fenella was. But I will not lie to you. I will not pretend to feel things I do not feel, or hide the things I do. The fire crackled. Somewhere in the house, a clock chimed. And what do you feel, Miss Holloway? The Duke asked. Right now, in this moment. Terrified, she thought. Furious. Lost. Alone. Curious, she said instead. I feel curious about why you chose me when you could have chosen no one at all. His expression shuddered. Just like that, the brief openness was gone. That, he said coldly, is none of your concern. He rose from the table, and the conversation was over. 3 weeks passed, and Vesna learned the rhythms of Thornhaven. She learned that the Duke rose at dawn and rode his black stallion across the moors regardless of weather. She learned that he spent his mornings in his study with the door locked, his afternoons reviewing estate business with his steward, and his evenings alone in the library. She learned that he dined with her every night, but rarely spoke more than a dozen words. That he watched her sometimes when he thought she was not looking. That his expression hardened whenever she asked questions about his past. She learned that the servants respected him, but did not love him. That the tenants on his land were well cared for, but kept at arm's length. That no one had visited Thornhaven in over a year. She learned that she was to be the Duchess of Thornhaven, mistress of an estate that ran like clockwork, and she had absolutely no idea what that meant. You should walk the grounds today, Mrs. Corvin suggested one morning over breakfast. The Duke had already departed for his ride, leaving Vesna alone with her toast and her confusion. The weather is mild. The gardens are worth seeing. Is that a suggestion or an order? It is a suggestion, Miss Holloway. You are not a prisoner here. No, just a guest who could not leave. Just a bride who had not yet been married. Just a woman suspended between two lives, belonging to neither. She walked the grounds. Mrs. Corvin was right. The gardens were worth seeing. Beyond the formal hedges lay wilder spaces. A rose garden dormant for winter. An orchard with bare-branched apple trees. A walled kitchen garden where herbs still grew despite the cold. And beyond that, a small stone building half hidden by ivy. Vesna approached it cautiously. The door was unlocked. She pushed it open. Inside was a studio. Easels stood draped in cloth. Canvases leaned against the walls, their faces turned away. The smell of turpentine lingered faintly in the air. She crossed to the nearest canvas and turned it around. A woman stared back at her. Young, perhaps 19 or 20. Dark hair, pale skin, eyes the color of a summer sky. Beautiful, hauntingly beautiful. And in those eyes, a sadness so profound that Vesna felt her breath catch. Who was she? The style was accomplished, the brushwork confident. This was not amateur work. Someone had painted this woman with skill and with love. Had the Duke painted this? Vesna turned another canvas. The same woman, but older now. Seated by a window, face turned toward light. Still sad. Still beautiful. Still painfully real. Another canvas. Another. All of them the same woman at different ages, in different poses, with different expressions. but always that same sorrow threading through her eyes. "What are you doing here?" Vesna spun. The Duke stood in the doorway. His riding clothes were splattered with mud, his dark hair disheveled from wind, and his expression, usually so controlled, was something else entirely. Fury, fear, grief, all three tangled together, twisting his features into something almost unrecognizable. "I was walking the grounds," Vesna said, her voice smaller than she intended. "The door was unlocked. I did not realize this space was private." "Everything in this house is private, Miss Holloway." He stepped inside, and his presence seemed to fill the entire room. Everything, including my past, my reasons, and certainly this studio. "Who is she?" The question escaped before she could stop it. Foolish. Dangerous. But the woman in those paintings demanded acknowledgement. The Duke crossed to the canvas Vesna had uncovered first and stared at it for a long moment. "My wife," he said finally. The word hung between them. Your wife?" "My first wife." He did not look at her. "Elspeth. She died 4 years ago." Vesna felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. He had been married before. No one had told her. Her parents had not mentioned it. The society pages had not reported it. This enormous, devastating fact had simply been omitted from every conversation about her future. How did she die? The question was barely a whisper. "That is none of your concern." "I'm to be your wife, your second wife. I believe it is very much my concern." His head turned sharply. Those pale eyes blazed. "You are to be my wife in name," he said, voice cold as the stone walls surrounding them. "In name only. You will manage my household. You will bear the title of Duchess. You will appear beside me at the functions that require my presence. But you will not share my bed. You will not share my past. And you will certainly not ask questions about the woman who came before you." Each word was a nail driven into her chest. "Then why marry at all?" Vesna demanded. "If you want nothing from me, if you intend to keep me at arm's length for the rest of our lives, why did you agree to this arrangement? Why did you take me when you could have taken no one?" For a moment, just a moment, something cracked in his expression. "Because I made a promise," he said quietly. "A promise I intend to keep." "To whom?" He did not answer. He simply turned, walked out of the studio, and disappeared into the gray morning light. Vesna stood alone among the canvases, surrounded by images of a dead woman she had never met, and felt the shape of her future shift into something darker than she had imagined. A wife in name only. A household to manage, but no husband to share it with. A life of proximity without intimacy, of presence without partnership. And underneath it all, a mystery she could not solve, a promise he would not explain. A woman whose painted eyes seemed to follow her, sorrowful and knowing, as Vesna finally forced herself to leave. That night at supper, the Duke did not appear. A footman delivered his apologies. His Grace was indisposed. He would take his meal in his study. Miss Holloway should dine without him. She ate alone at that enormous table, surrounded by empty chairs, and understood with terrible clarity what her life was about to become. But as she climbed the stairs to her room that night, something caught her eye. A door she had not noticed before, slightly ajar, light flickering within. She should walk past, should go to her room, should accept the boundaries he had drawn and learn to live within them. Instead, she pushed the door open. The Duke sat by a dying fire, a glass of whiskey in his hand, staring at something in his lap. He did not look up when she entered. He did not seem to notice her at all. His face was wet with tears. Vesna froze in the doorway. She had never seen a man cry. Her father would have considered it weakness. Her brother had been trained from childhood to hide any emotion softer than anger. But the Duke of Thornhaven wept silently, openly, without shame. And in his lap, clutched in his free hand, was a small painted miniature of the woman from the studio. Elspeth. Vesna should leave, should retreat, should pretend she had seen nothing. But her feet would not move. 4 years ago today, the Duke said without looking up. His voice was hoarse, barely audible. She died 4 years ago to today, and I still cannot breathe when I think of her. Vesna felt her own eyes burn. I am sorry, she whispered. I am so sorry. He looked up then, and in his eyes, beneath the grief, beneath the walls, beneath the coldness he wore like armor, she saw something else. Loneliness. Vast and consuming and utterly devastating. He was not cold because he felt too little. He was cold because he felt too much. Go to bed, Miss Holloway, he said quietly. Please. She went. But as she lay in her own room that night, staring at the ceiling, she made a decision. She would not simply survive this marriage. She would not resign herself to a life of silence and distance. She would find out who Elspeth was, what had happened to her, what promise the Duke had made, and why it had led him to marry a stranger. And somehow, some way, she would find the man behind the armor, even if it destroyed her. The wedding took place on a gray Tuesday morning with rain streaking the chapel windows. Vesna wore ivory silk. The Duke wore black. The vicar spoke words she barely heard, and when it was time to exchange vows, she looked into those pale eyes and saw nothing. No warmth, no hope, no acknowledgement that this moment meant anything at all. I now pronounce you man and wife. The Duke did not kiss her. He simply offered his arm, led her down the aisle, and handed her into the carriage that would take them back to Thornhaven. They were married, and nothing had changed. The first week of her new life as Duchess passed in a blur of adjustments. Mrs. Corvin deferred to her on household matters. Servants called her Your Grace and curtsied when she passed. She had a new title, a new name, a new position in the world. But her husband remained a stranger. He kept to his schedule. Dawn rides, locked study, estate business, solitary evenings. They dined together most nights, and sometimes he even spoke to her, brief exchanges about the weather or the condition of the roads. But the conversations never deepened, the walls never lowered, and always, between them, the ghost of Elspeth. On the 9th day of her marriage, everything changed. She was in the morning room reviewing menus with Mrs. Corvin when Bridget burst through the door, cheeks flushed with alarm. Your Grace, there is a visitor, a lady. She arrived without notice and is demanding to see the Duke immediately. Mrs. Corvin's face went pale. Who is it? Lady Margot Vance. She says she is family. The name meant nothing to Vesna, but the effect it had on Mrs. Corvin was unmistakable. The older woman's hands trembled as she set down her pen. Show her to the blue drawing room, Mrs. Corvin said, and send word to His Grace immediately. Bridget fled. Mrs. Corvin turned to Vesna with an expression that bordered on pity. Your Grace, I should warn you. Lady Margot was Lady Elspeth's cousin, her closest friend. She has not visited Thornhaven since the funeral, and her presence here now is unexpected. Why would she come? I do not know, but I suspect it has something to do with you. Vesna's stomach tightened. Of course, a new duchess had taken Elspeth's place. Someone who had loved Elspeth would naturally want to assess the replacement. I should meet her, Vesna said. If she is family, it would be rude to hide in my rooms. Your Grace, perhaps you should wait for the Duke. If she wanted to see only the Duke, she would not have arrived unannounced. She wants to surprise us, to catch us off guard. Vesna rose, smoothing her skirts. I will not give her the satisfaction of seeming afraid. She walked to the blue drawing room with her spine straight and her heart hammering. Lady Margot Vance was everything Vesna had expected, and worse. Beautiful in the way of marble statues, cold and perfect and untouchable. Her hair was pale gold, her eyes a piercing blue, her gown immaculate despite the journey. She stood by the window examining a porcelain figurine with the air of someone cataloging evidence. "Lady Margot," Vesna said, "welcome to Thornhaven. I am Vesna, the Duchess of Thornhaven." Those blue eyes swept over her with undisguised assessment. "Yes," Lady Margot said. "I know who you are. The replacement." The word landed like a slap. "I prefer to think of myself as the current Duchess. You may prefer whatever you like. It does not change what you are." Lady Margot set down the figurine. "I knew your sister, you know. Fenella. We were presented at court the same season. She was charming, decorative, exactly the sort of empty-headed ornament Calder should have married the first time around." Vesna felt her temper stir. "If you are here to insult my family, Lady Margot, I suggest you do it quickly. I have a household to manage." Something glinted in those cold eyes. Surprise, perhaps. "You have a spine," Lady Margot said. "Elspeth had a spine, too. It did not save her." Save her from what? The question hung between them. Lady Margot's expression shuddered. "From this house," she said quietly. "From this marriage. From him." Before Vesna could respond, the door opened, and the Duke strode in. His face was thunderous. "Margot, I did not expect you." "Clearly not." Lady Margot's smile was sharp as glass. "I heard you had remarried. I had to see for myself, to ensure you were not making the same mistakes. My marriage is none of your concern. Elspeth was my cousin, my dearest friend. Everything you do is my concern." She turned to look at Vesna again. "She is not what I expected. Not beautiful, not sophisticated, not the sort of woman who would catch your eye. That is enough." "Is it? Because I remember what happened the last time you married a woman who caught your eye, Calder. I remember how it ended, and I will not stand by and watch you destroy another innocent girl." "I said enough." The Duke's voice cracked like a whip. Lady Margot fell silent, but her eyes blazed. "You will leave," the Duke said. "Now. And you will not return without invitation." "Or what? You will have me thrown out?" Lady Margot laughed, bitter and bright. "I'm not afraid of you, Calder. I know the truth. And if this girl has any sense, she will run before it is too late." She swept toward the door, pausing beside Vesna long enough to whisper 4 words. "Ask him about the tower." Then she was gone. Vesna stood frozen in the aftermath. The Duke had not moved. His hands were clenched at his sides, his breathing ragged, his face a mask of barely contained fury. "What tower?" Vesna asked. "It does not matter." Lady Margot seems to think it matters very much. Lady Margot is a bitter, grief-stricken woman who has blamed me for her cousin's death since the funeral. He turned to face her, and his eyes were hard as flint. "She will continue blaming me until she dies. Her opinion is irrelevant. Is she wrong to blame you?" The question left her mouth before she could stop it. Reckless, dangerous. But she had to know. The Duke's expression wavered, just for an instant. Just long enough for her to see something terrible pass behind his eyes. "Yes," he said quietly. "She is wrong." He walked out without another word. Vesna sank into the nearest chair, trembling. Lady Margot's words echoed in her mind. Ask him about the tower. What tower? Thornhaven had several dark spires stabbing the sky, most of them locked and unused. What had happened there? What did Lady Margot believe the Duke had done? And why did part of Vesna suspect that the answer would change everything? She found the tower 3 days later. It had taken careful exploration, quiet questions to servants who answered reluctantly, and a ring of keys borrowed from Mrs. Corvin's office. Vesna told herself she was simply learning the layout of her new home, that any duchess would want to know every corner of her estate. But she knew the truth. She was searching for answers about Elspeth, about the promise, about the husband she had married but did not know. The tower stood at the northwest corner of Thornhaven, separated from the main house by a covered walkway that had clearly not been used in years. Dust coated the floorboards. Cobwebs draped the windows. The door was locked, but the third key on the ring turned smoothly. Vesna pushed it open. Stairs spiraled upward into darkness. She had brought a candle, and its flame wavered in the draft as she climbed. 1 flight. 2. 3. At the top, another door. This one unlocked. She stepped inside. The room was round, with windows on every side. It had been a sitting room once. Vesna could see the ghost of its former beauty, the faded wallpaper, the remains of elegant furniture now draped in dust covers. But something was wrong. Then she saw it. The windows. Every single one of them had been nailed shut. Heavy boards crossed the glass, blocking the view, blocking the light, blocking any possibility of opening them. Why would someone seal the windows in a room this beautiful? Unless they were trying to keep something out. Or someone in. Vesna's blood went cold. She crossed to the nearest window and examined the boards. They were old but solid, the nails driven deep. This had not been a temporary measure. Someone had intended these windows to stay sealed forever. A sound behind her made her spin. The Duke stood in the doorway. His face was white. His hands shook slightly at his sides, and in his eyes, Vesna saw something she had never seen before. Fear. "You should not be here," he said. "What happened in this room? Leave. Now." "What happened here?" She did not move. "Why are the windows sealed? What are you hiding?" For a long moment he did not answer. He simply stood there, breathing hard, staring at her, as if she had uncovered something he had spent years trying to bury. Then, so quietly she almost missed it, he spoke. She jumped. The words did not make sense, could not make sense. "What?" "Elspeth." His voice cracked on the name. "She jumped. From this window. 4 years ago. She climbed out onto the ledge while I was downstairs entertaining guests, and she jumped." The room seemed to tilt. She took her own life? No. The word was savage. She did not want to die. She was not well. She had been unwell for months, seeing things that were not there, hearing voices that told her terrible lies. Her family had known of her fragile mind since childhood, but after we married, the episodes worsened. I had brought in doctors, specialists. I was trying to help her, but she slipped away during a dinner party, came up here, and before anyone could stop her, he stopped, could not continue. Vesna stood in the sealed tower room, surrounded by dust and grief, and felt her entire understanding shift. This was not a story of murder or malice. This was a story of illness, of a man who had loved his wife, had tried to save her, and had failed. "Lady Margot blames you," Vesna said softly. "Lady Margot believes I drove Elspeth mad, that my coldness, my distance, my inability to give her the affection she needed, caused her mind to break." He laughed, hollow. "She is not entirely wrong. I was cold. I was distant. I did not know how to love properly. But I did love her. In my way. In the only way I knew how." He crossed to one of the sealed windows and pressed his palm against the boards. "I sealed them myself," he said. the night after the funeral. I came up here with a hammer and nails, and I sealed every window. I could not bear the thought of them open, of the wind coming through, of anyone else standing where she stood. Vesna felt tears burn her eyes. Why did you not tell me? Because it is not your burden to carry. He turned to face her. I married you because I made a promise to Elspeth's father. He was dying. He begged me to remarry, to have children, to carry on the family name that would otherwise die with me. I promised him I would find a suitable wife within 5 years of his death. And that deadline was approaching. Yes, your family's offer was convenient. Your sister's flight was more convenient still. His jaw hardened. I did not want a beautiful wife. I did not want charm or simper or performance. I wanted someone practical, someone who would not expect love, someone who would accept the terms of this arrangement and not ask questions. But I am asking questions. Yes. Something shifted in his expression. You are. Silence stretched between them. The dust motes drifted in the candlelight. Outside, the wind howled against the sealed windows, unable to break through. I should go, Vesna said finally. I should not have come here. No, you should not have. But he did not sound angry. He sounded tired, defeated. But I am not entirely sorry that you did. She looked at him, really looked, saw the exhaustion carved into his features, the loneliness, the grief that had shaped him into something cold and guarded. He had loved Elspeth, loved her, and lost her, and blamed himself for every moment since. I will not ask any more questions, she said quietly. About Elspeth, about this room, about any of it. Thank you. But I want something in return. His eyes narrowed. What? Honesty. When I ask you something about the present, about our life here, about what you expect from this marriage, I want the truth. No evasions, no locked doors. Can you give me that? He studied her for a long moment. I can try, he said finally. It was not a promise, but it was more than she had expected. She walked past him toward the door, and as she did, his hand caught her elbow, just briefly, just enough to stop her. Vesna, her name on his lips, not Miss Holloway, not Duchess, her name. Yes? Thank you. His voice was rough. For not looking at me the way Margot does, like I am a monster. You are not a monster. How can you be certain? She turned to face him fully. They were close now, closer than they had ever been. She could feel the heat of his hand through her sleeve. Because monsters do not seal windows to keep out memories, she said. And they do not weep over miniatures on anniversaries. His breath caught. You saw that? Yes. And you did not run? No. I stayed. Something passed between them. Something fragile and unnamed. Something that felt like the beginning of understanding. Then he released her elbow and stepped back. Go, he said. Before we both say something we cannot take back. She went, but as she descended the spiral stairs, she realized something had shifted. The wall between them had cracked. Not broken, not fallen, but cracked. And through that crack, just barely, she could see the man beneath. 2 weeks after the tower, Vesna woke to screaming. It was past midnight. The house was silent except for that terrible sound, raw and anguished, echoing through the corridors. She was out of bed before she fully understood what she was doing, pulling on her robe, grabbing a candle, moving toward the noise. The screaming stopped as abruptly as it had started, but she kept moving. The Duke's chambers were at the far end of the east wing. She had never been inside them. Their marriage existed in parallel lines, dining rooms and drawing rooms, never bedchambers. She stopped outside his door, listened. Silence. Then, muffled, the sound of ragged breathing, a groan of exhaustion. She should leave. This was not her business. Whatever demons haunted his sleep were his own. But she thought of the tower, the sealed windows, the grief he had carried alone for 4 years. She knocked. The sound stopped immediately. Footsteps crossed the room. The door opened. The Duke stood before her, shirt untucked, hair wild, and face sheened with sweat. His eyes were red-rimmed. His hands trembled. Vesna. Her name again. What are you doing here? I heard screaming. I thought someone was hurt. No one is hurt. It was just a dream. He started to close the door. Go back to bed. Calder. His first name. She had never used it before. The sound of it stopped him cold. You do not have to tell me what you dreamed, she said quietly. You do not have to explain anything. But you also do not have to send me away. He stared at her. In the candlelight, he looked younger than his 34 years. Younger and more vulnerable than she had ever seen him. You should go, he said. Should I? Yes. But he did not close the door. Vesna made a decision. Later, she would not be able to explain what drove her. Instinct, compassion, the bone, deep understanding of what it felt like to be alone. She stepped past him into the room. His bedchamber was larger than hers, but just as impersonal. Dark furniture, heavy curtains, a fire burning low in the grate. The bed was massive, sheets tangled, pillows thrown to the floor. What are you doing? His voice was sharp with alarm. Sitting. She crossed to the chair by the fire and lowered herself into it. I am not going to touch you. I am not going to ask questions. I am simply going to sit here until you fall asleep again. That is absurd. Perhaps. But I am doing it anyway. He stood by the door, frozen, clearly torn between throwing her out and something else. Finally, slowly, he closed the door. You are the most stubborn woman I have ever met, he said. I've been told. He almost smiled. The ghost of it touched his features before disappearing. He crossed to the bed and sat on its edge, watching her. The dream started after Elspeth died, he said quietly. Every night for the first year, then less frequently. Now perhaps once a month. But when they come, they are vivid. You dream of her. I dream of finding her, at the base of the tower, in the snow. His voice was flat. She was wearing a white nightgown. It turned red. The snow around her turned red. And she looked at me with those beautiful eyes. And she said, he stopped. What did she say? Why did you not save me? The words fell into the silence like stones. Vesna felt her chest tighten. That was not your fault. I know that in my mind. But in the dreams, I believe her. I believe I could have done more. Been more. That if I had only loved her better, she would not have climbed out that window. You cannot love someone out of madness. No. He looked at her, and his eyes were devastated. But you can blame yourself for not trying hard enough. She understood then. Understood everything. The coldness was not cruelty. It was protection. If he did not let anyone close, he could not fail them, could not lose them. You are going to exhaust yourself, she said gently, lying awake all night, afraid to sleep. It will kill you eventually. Perhaps. Or you could let someone sit with you, keep the dreams at bay, share the weight. And you are volunteering for this duty? I am. Why? She considered the question. Honesty, she had demanded of him. Honesty in return. Because I know what it feels like to be alone, she said. Because my family sent me here as the unwanted one, and you took me anyway. And that means something. And because you look at me sometimes, when you think I am not watching, and the way you look at me is not the way a man looks at an inconvenience." His breath caught. "Vesna, I am not asking for anything. I am not expecting declarations or promises. I am simply saying that you do not have to carry this alone anymore. If you let me, I will help you carry it." Silence. Then, so quietly she almost missed it, he spoke. "Come here." Her heart stumbled. "What?" "Come here. Please." She rose from the chair, crossed the room, stopped beside the bed, close enough to touch, but not quite touching. He reached out and took her hand. His fingers were cold, trembling, but his grip was firm as he pulled her down to sit beside him. "I do not know how to do this," he said. "I do not know how to let someone in. It has been so long since I tried that I have forgotten the shape of it. Then we will learn together. I may fail. Then we will fail together." He studied her face in the firelight. "Lie down," she said. "Close your eyes. I will stay until you sleep." "And then?" "Then I will go back to my room, and tomorrow we will pretend this never happened, if that is what you need. Or we will acknowledge it, if you prefer. The choice is yours." He did not move for a long moment. Then, slowly, he lay back against the pillows. His hand did not release hers. "Stay," he said. "Please. Just for tonight." She should refuse, should maintain the boundaries they had established, should protect herself from the inevitable heartbreak. Instead, she lay down beside him. Not touching. Not quite. But close enough to feel his warmth, to hear his breathing slow, to know the moment when exhaustion finally pulled him under. She stayed awake for a long time, watching the fire burn low, feeling the weight of his hand in hers. This changes nothing, she told herself. But she knew it was a lie. When she finally slept, she did not dream, and neither did he. Morning light changed everything and nothing. Vesna woke alone in her own bed, having slipped away before dawn. She had not wanted the servants to find her in the Duke's chambers, but she had not wanted to leave either. At breakfast, Calder was already seated. He rose when she entered, which he had never done before. His eyes met hers across the table, and something passed between them, something deeper than acknowledgement. "Good morning, Your Grace," she said carefully. "Good morning." He waited until she sat before resuming his seat. "I trust you slept well." "I did. And you?" "Better than I have in months." The admission hung between them. Neither looked away. "I have business in the village this morning," he said. "Estate matters. But I wondered if you might accompany me. The weather is fair." It was not a declaration, but they both knew what it meant. He was choosing to spend time with her, voluntarily, in daylight. "I would like that," she said. They rode out together an hour later. The countryside around Thornhaven was wild and beautiful, rolling moors and ancient forests, and streams that glittered silver in the autumn sun. "Elspeth hated it here," Calder said suddenly. Vesna glanced at him. He was staring straight ahead. She was raised in London. Parties, salons, the endless social whirl. She found the moors oppressive, the silence unnerving. She used to say the wind sounded like voices. "Did you ever consider living elsewhere?" I offered, several times. But by then, the illness had taken hold. She did not trust cities, did not trust crowds. The only place she felt safe was Thornhaven, and even that safety was an illusion. He fell silent. Vesna did not push. They reached the village by mid-morning. It was small but prosperous. The villagers greeted the Duke with respectful nods and curious glances at his new wife. "The new Duchess," Vesna heard one woman whisper. "Not much to look at, is she?" "Better than the last one," the second woman replied. That one had the devil's own eyes, beautiful but cold as the grave. Vesna pretended not to hear. But beside her, Calder stiffened. They conducted the estate business quickly. A dispute over grazing rights. A request for funds to repair the schoolhouse. A young couple asking permission to marry. It was on the ride back that everything went wrong. A carriage was waiting in the Thornhaven courtyard. Fine horses. Expensive lacquer. A coat of arms Vesna did not recognize. Calder's face went white. "Stay here," he said, dismounting. "Calder, what is it?" "Stay here." But she did not. She dismounted and followed him toward the house. The great hall was full of people. Servants pressed against the walls. Mrs. Corvin stood by the staircase, face pale, and in the center of the room, flanked by two men in legal attire, stood Lady Margot Vance. She was smiling. "Lord Ashbourne," she said sweetly, "how delightful that you have returned. We have been waiting. What is the meaning of this?" "The meaning?" She produced a sheaf of papers from her reticule. "The meaning is that I am here to contest your marriage." Vesna felt the blow land in her chest. "On what grounds?" Calder's voice was ice. "On the grounds that you are not fit to remarry. That your first wife's death was not the tragic accident you claimed, but a direct result of your negligence and cruelty. That you kept her imprisoned in that tower, denied her proper medical care, and drove her to madness through isolation and emotional abuse. That is a lie. Is it?" Margot's eyes glittered. "I have witnesses, servants who will testify to Elspeth's treatment, doctors who will confirm that she begged for help and was denied. Letters she wrote in her final weeks, describing her terror and despair." "Letters? What letters?" Margot's smile widened. "Did you not know? Elspeth wrote to me, constantly. She told me everything. How you locked her in her rooms, how you took away her writing materials, how you forbade her from seeing anyone who might help her. I was protecting her. She was ill. She needed containment for her own safety." "Containment?" Margot laughed. "Is that what you call it? Because the letters tell a different story. The letters tell of a husband who slowly, systematically destroyed her." Vesna felt doubt creep in despite herself. Was it possible? Had she been wrong about him? "Those letters are forgeries," Calder said. "Or the ravings of a woman whose mind had broken. Elspeth was not imprisoned. She was cared for. I hired the finest doctors in England. I sat with her through every episode. I held her when she screamed. And yet she jumped from a tower rather than spend another day as your wife." Silence. Absolute, devastating silence. Calder looked as if he had been struck, his face drained of color. "Leave," he said. His voice was barely audible. "Leave my house. I will leave, for now. But I will return, with magistrates, with lawyers, with every piece of evidence necessary to prove that you are not fit to hold the title of Duke, let alone take another wife." Margot turned to Vesna with something like pity. "Run, girl, while you still can." She swept out with her legal entourage. The front door slammed behind them. Calder did not move. Vesna stood frozen. The servants were staring. Mrs. Corvin was weeping quietly, and the man she had begun to trust looked like something inside him had shattered. "Calder," she said softly. He turned and walked away. She found him an hour later in the tower. He was sitting on the floor beneath the sealed windows, knees drawn to his chest, head bowed. He looked smaller than she had ever seen him. Broken. "She is lying," he said without looking up. "About the letters, about the imprisonment, about all of it. I know. Do you?" Now he did look up, and his eyes were ravaged. "Because even I am not certain anymore. I thought I was helping her. But what if I made her worse? What if every decision I made pushed her closer to that window?" Vesna crossed the room and sat down beside him on the dusty floor. "You loved her," she said. "You did everything you could." "Everything I could wasn't enough. That does not make you a monster. Then what does it make me?" She reached for his hand. His fingers were cold, but he did not pull away. "Human," she said. "It makes you human." He stared at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he leaned into her. His forehead pressed against her shoulder. His body shook with silent sobs. She held him. She held him while the afternoon light faded and the shadows lengthened. She held him while he grieved for a wife he had loved and lost and could not save. And she knew, with terrible certainty, that whatever came next, she would not abandon him. Not to Margot. Not to the courts. Not to the ghosts. She would fight for him, even if he could not fight for himself. The weeks that followed were a siege. Margot made good on her threats. Lawyers descended upon Thornhaven. Magistrates conducted interviews. Servants were questioned. The letters were presented as evidence. Calder retreated into himself. He stopped dining with Vesna, stopped riding out in the mornings, stopped speaking to anyone except his solicitors. He locked himself in his study for hours, emerging only to collapse into exhausted sleep. Vesna watched it happen and felt helpless. "He is destroying himself," she told Mrs. Corvin one morning. "He is letting her win without even fighting back. His Grace has always carried his burdens alone. He does not know how to accept help. Then he will have to learn." That night, Vesna went to his study without invitation and walked in without knocking. He was seated at his desk, papers scattered everywhere, a glass of whiskey untouched at his elbow. He looked up when she entered, and his eyes were hollow. "You should not be here," he said. "I am your wife. I can be wherever I choose. Not for long. If Margot succeeds, this marriage will be annulled. You will be free. And if I do not want to be free?" He stared at her. "Why would you want to stay? You have seen what I am. You have heard what Margot says I did. I have heard accusations, not proof. The letters are either forged or the product of a broken mind. You said so yourself. And you believe me?" "Yes." The word hung between them. Simple. Absolute. "Why?" His voice cracked. "Why would you believe me over her?" Vesna crossed the room and stopped in front of his desk. "Because I have watched you," she said. "For weeks now. I have watched you grieve for a woman you could not save. I have watched you seal windows and keep miniatures and weep on anniversaries. I have watched you try so hard to push everyone away, and I have seen what it costs you." Vesna. A monster would not feel guilt. A monster would not blame himself for something that wasn't his fault. A monster would not look at me the way you look at me, like you are terrified of caring, but cannot help yourself. His breath caught. "I am terrified," he admitted, "more than I have ever been." "Of what?" "Of this. Of wanting something I do not deserve. Of letting myself hope and then watching it shatter." She moved around the desk until she stood beside his chair, close enough to touch. "Then let it shatter," she said quietly. "And I will help you pick up the pieces." He looked up at her. In his eyes, she saw the war, the fear fighting the longing, the walls crumbling. "I cannot promise you anything," he said. "I cannot promise that I will be the husband you deserve. I have failed at it before. I am not asking for promises. Then what are you asking for?" She reached down and took his face in her hands. His jaw was rough with stubble. His cheeks were gaunt, but his eyes burned with something raw and desperate. "I'm asking you to try," she said. "That is all. Just try." He closed his eyes. A shudder ran through him. Then he pulled her down into his lap and kissed her. It was not gentle. It was not careful. It was the kiss of a man who had been drowning and had finally found air. His hands tangled in her hair, his mouth devoured hers, and Vesna kissed him back with equal desperation when they finally broke apart, both gasping, his forehead pressed against hers. "I have wanted this," he breathed. "Since the moment you walked into that drawing room in your sister's dress and told me you expected nothing but survival. And I have wanted you since the moment I saw you weeping over a miniature and realized you were not cold at all. I'm terrible at this. So am I." He laughed. Actually laughed. The sound was rusty, but real. "What do we do now?" he asked. "Now we fight Margot together. We find the truth about those letters. We prove that you are not what she claims. And then we see what this marriage can become." His arms tightened around her. "You should run," he said quietly. "You should take the annulment and escape while you still can. I should do many things. I rarely do any of them. Stubborn woman. Impossible man." He kissed her again, softer this time, a promise rather than a plea. And when they finally left the study together, hand in hand, Vesna knew that whatever happened next, they would face it together. The siege was not over, but they were no longer alone. The evidence arrived 3 days later. A servant, one of the older footmen who had worked at Thornhaven for decades, came forward with information. He had been present during Elspeth's final months. He remembered things that did not match Margot's narrative. "Lady Elspeth was ill, Your Grace," he told Vesna and Calder in the privacy of the study. "Terribly ill. But His Grace never imprisoned her. He sat with her for hours, read to her, held her hand when she cried." "And the letters?" Calder asked. "Did you ever see her write letters?" "Never, Your Grace. Lady Elspeth could barely hold a pen by the end. Her hand shook too badly, and her mind was not capable of coherent writing. She would not have been able to compose the letters Lady Margot presented." Hope stirred in Calder's eyes for the first time in weeks. "Would you testify to this?" Vesna asked. "Before magistrates?" "I would, Your Grace. Several of us would. We know the truth of what happened in this house, and we will not let Lady Margot's lies stand." The servants testified. One by one, they told their stories. The cook who had prepared special meals for Elspeth. The maid who had brushed her hair and sung to her. The footman who had found her at the base of the tower. None of them described a monster. But Margot was not finished. She produced a doctor, a specialist who had examined Elspeth in her final weeks and claimed that his recommendations for treatment had been ignored, that the Duke had refused to send her to an asylum where she might have received proper care. It was a devastating blow. "Is it true?" Vesna asked that night in Calder's chambers. "Partly." His voice was heavy. "He did recommend an asylum, a private institution outside London. I refused." "Why?" "Because I visited it." He stared into the flames. "I saw how they treated their patients. Chains, isolation, treatments closer to torture than medicine. I could not send her there. Even if it might have saved her? It would not have saved her. It would have destroyed whatever remained of the woman I loved." He turned to look at her. "I made a choice. Perhaps it was wrong, but I made it out of love, not cruelty. Then we tell the court that. We explain your reasoning. And if they do not believe me, then we find another way." But the legal proceedings dragged on. Margot's lawyers twisted every fact, painted every act of love as an act of control. By the end of the month, Vesna could see Calder crumbling. He stopped sleeping again. The nightmares returned. He flinched when she touched him. "Perhaps she is right," he said one night. "Perhaps I am not fit to be anyone's husband. Perhaps you should take the annulment." "Calder, no. I am serious." He would not look at her. If the court rules against me, I will be disgraced. Anyone connected to me will suffer the same fate. I do not care about reputation. You should. Your family sent you here as the unwanted one, but you are not unwanted anymore. You are capable of so much more than being the wife of a ruined man. I do not want more. I want you. Want is not enough. His voice broke. I cannot do this again. I cannot watch someone I care about be destroyed because of me. I'm not Elspeth. No, you are not. Finally, he looked at her. You are stronger, more stubborn. But that only means you will survive when I fail you, and I cannot bear that. Vesna felt tears burn her eyes. You are pushing me away. I'm protecting you. I do not need your protection. I need your partnership. She crossed to him, took his face in her hands, forced him to meet her eyes. Then we will be broken together, she said fiercely. Damaged together. Haunted together. I did not marry you expecting perfection. I married you expecting honesty. And if you are honest with me now, you will admit that you are afraid, and that pushing me away is easier than risking your heart again. His breath shuddered. I am afraid, he admitted. So am I. But I am more afraid of losing you than of anything Margot can do. He pulled her close, held her so tightly she could barely breathe. I do not deserve you, he whispered. Let me decide what you deserve. They stood there in the firelight, holding each other, as the last of his walls finally crumbled. And Vesna knew, with absolute certainty, that whatever the court decided, they would survive it. Together. The final hearing was held in London. Vesna had never been inside a courtroom before. It was smaller than she expected, paneled in dark wood, filled with men in wigs and robes. Margot sat on one side, radiating righteous certainty. Calder sat on the other, pale but composed. Vesna sat behind him, close enough to touch if she reached forward, close enough to remind him he was not alone. The proceedings were brutal. Margot's lawyers presented their case with surgical precision. The letters, the doctor's testimony, the narrative of a cruel husband. They painted Elspeth as a victim and Calder as her torturer. Calder's lawyers countered with servant testimonies and medical records. They presented evidence that the letters were likely forged, the handwriting inconsistent with samples known to be Elspeth's, but it was not enough. The judge's face remained impassive, and Margot smiled with quiet triumph. Then something unexpected happened. A door at the back of the courtroom opened. A woman entered. Old, frail, leaning heavily on a cane, but her eyes were sharp. I wish to testify. The judge frowned. And you are? Helena Vance, Lady Margot's mother. Margot's face went white. Mother, what are you doing here? You should be resting. I have been silent too long. I will not go to my grave with lies on my conscience. She was sworn in. She sat in the witness chair, and she began to speak. My niece Elspeth was troubled from a young age. She saw things others did not see, heard voices, had episodes so violent our family had to restrain her for her own safety. This was long before she ever married, long before she ever met Lord Ashbourne. Margot's lawyer tried to interrupt. This is not relevant. It is entirely relevant. Helena's gaze was fierce. My daughter has told you that Lord Ashbourne drove Elspeth to madness, but Elspeth's illness existed before her marriage. Lord Ashbourne did not cause it. He managed it. He gave her 3 years of stability, 3 years where her suffering was eased. And when the illness finally overwhelmed her, he blamed himself so completely that he has been punishing himself ever since. The courtroom fell silent. The letters my daughter presented are forgeries, Helena continued. I know this because I recognized the handwriting. It is Margot's. She has been practicing Elspeth's script since childhood. She created those documents herself, from fragments of things Elspeth said in her worst moments. The judge leaned forward. Lady Helena, these are serious accusations. They are the truth, and I will swear to them on my life. She turned to look at Calder. Forgive me, Lord Ashbourne. I should have spoken sooner. I should have stopped her before it came to this. But I was weak, and I let my daughter's grief blind me to her actions. The courtroom erupted. The case was dismissed. Margot was escorted out by her lawyers, her face a mask of shock. Helena was helped to a carriage, too frail to remain, and Calder sat frozen in his seat, unable to process what had happened. Vesna reached forward and touched his shoulder. It is over, she said softly. He turned to look at her. His eyes were wet. Is it? Yes. They left the courtroom together. Outside, London bustled with its usual chaos, but Vesna saw none of it. She saw only the man beside her. I need to tell you something, he said. They had found a quiet corner in a nearby park, a bench beneath a bare-limbed tree. During the hearing, when Helena was testifying, I realized something. He took her hands in his. I have spent 4 years punishing myself for Elspeth's death, believing that my coldness, my failure to love properly had killed her. And I have been so afraid of failing again that I have held everyone at arm's length, including you. Calder, let me finish. When Margot accused me, part of me believed her. Part of me thought, yes, this is what I deserve. I am a monster. You are not. I know that now, because of you. His grip tightened on her hands. You saw me at my worst. You saw me weeping in the dark, breaking apart in that tower, pushing you away. And you stayed. You stayed when anyone else would have run. I told you I would. You did. And I did not believe you. He lifted her hands to his lips. But you did. You chose me. Not because I was a duke. Not because of wealth or title. You chose me because you saw something worth saving. Tears slid down Vesna's cheeks. I love you, he said. I should have said it weeks ago. But I was afraid. I am still afraid. But I am more afraid of losing you than of anything else in this world. Calder, her voice broke. Marry me again, he said. Not in name only. Not as an arrangement. As my wife, my partner, my love. Marry me because you want to, not because your family gave you no choice. She laughed through her tears. We are already married. Then marry me anyway, in front of everyone, in the chapel at Thornhaven with the servants and the villagers. Let me stand before them and declare that I choose you, that I will always choose you. She pulled him close and kissed him, softly, sweetly, with all the love she had been holding back. Yes, she whispered against his lips. Yes? Yes, I will marry you again, as many times as you ask. He laughed, and the sound was free and bright. Once more should suffice, but I reserve the right to ask again if I forget how lucky I am. They sat together on that bench and let the world rush past without them. For the first time since Vesna had been pushed through those drawing room doors, she felt like she belonged. Not as the unwanted one, not as the replacement, as herself. Chosen. Loved. Home. The second wedding was nothing like the first. The chapel at Thornhaven was filled with light. Candles flickered in every window. Evergreen garlands draped the pews. Outside, snow fell gently. Vesna wore a gown of deep blue silk, her favorite color. Her hair was loose, falling in waves. She carried a small bouquet of winter roses. Calder waited at the altar in midnight black, his eyes bright with emotion. He had not stopped smiling since she appeared in the doorway. The servants filled the pews. Mrs. Corvin wept openly. Bridget beamed. Even the old gardener had come, and he nodded his approval as Vesna passed. The vicar spoke the words, the same words as before. But this time, they meant something entirely different. This time, when Calder took her hands, his fingers were warm and steady. This time, when she spoke her vows, her voice did not tremble. And this time, when the vicar pronounced them man and wife, Calder pulled her into his arms and kissed her like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. The chapel erupted in cheers. Afterward, there was a feast in the great hall. Food and wine and music, laughter echoing off the stone walls, dancing that lasted until midnight. Vesna stood by the window, watching the snow fall, when Calder appeared beside her. "Happy?" he asked. "More than I ever imagined possible." "Good." He wrapped his arm around her waist. "Because I intend to spend the rest of my life making you even happier." "That sounds exhausting." "It will be worth it." She leaned into him, and they watched the snow together. Outside, Thornhaven gleamed in the moonlight, no longer oppressive, no longer cold. Home. "I want to show you something," Calder said quietly. He led her through the halls, up the stairs, toward the tower. Vesna's heart tightened. "Calder, trust me." The door to the tower was open. Light spilled from within, and when she climbed the spiral stairs and stepped inside, she gasped. The windows were open. The boards had been removed, the nails pulled out. Fresh glass gleamed in frames that had been repaired and restored, and through those windows, the moon poured silver light across a room that had been completely transformed. The dusty furniture was gone. In its place stood new chairs, a writing desk, shelves filled with books. The paintings of Elspeth had been moved to a single wall, arranged respectfully. "I cannot forget her," Calder said softly, "and I do not want to. She was part of my life, and her death shaped who I became. But I can't stop hiding from her memory. I can open the windows and let in the light." Vesna's eyes filled with tears. "It is beautiful. It is yours." He turned her to face him. "This room, this house, everything I have, everything I am. Yours." She kissed him, long and deep and full of promise. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too, more than I knew was possible." They stood in the tower room, surrounded by moonlight and memory, and let the wind blow through the open windows, carrying away the last of the ghosts. 2 years later, Vesna stood in the morning room of Thornhaven, watching a small child toddle across the carpet toward his father. Edmund Ashbourne, heir to the Duchy of Thornhaven, had his father's dark hair and his mother's stubborn chin. He was 15 months old, perpetually curious, and absolutely fearless. "Papa!" he declared, crashing into Calder's legs. Calder scooped him up with a laugh, lifting him high above his head. Edmund shrieked with delight. "Higher!" "You are going to drop him," Vesna said, but she was smiling. "I would never." Calder pulled Edmund close, pressing a kiss to his forehead. "I have excellent reflexes." "You have excellent arrogance." "Also true." Mrs. Corvin appeared in the doorway. "A letter has arrived for you, Your Grace, from London." Vesna took it, recognizing the handwriting immediately. Her mother. Lady Bellamy had taken years to accept the marriage, longer still to acknowledge that her unwanted daughter had somehow become a duchess more beloved than Fenella ever would have been. The letter was brief. Stilted congratulations on Edmund, a mention that Fenella and her husband had finally returned from Yorkshire and were seeking reconciliation. Vesna set the letter aside without finishing it. "Bad news?" Calder asked. "Old news. Nothing that matters anymore." He crossed to her, Edmund still in his arms, and pulled her into an embrace. The three of them stood together by the window, watching sunlight spill across the gardens. "Do you remember what you said to me?" Calder asked quietly. "That first night, when you stayed with me? I said many things. You said you would help me carry the weight, that I did not have to do it alone anymore. I remember. You were right. He pressed a kiss to her temple. I thought this house would always feel like a tomb. I thought I would spend the rest of my life sealed inside my own grief. But you opened the windows. You let in the light. You saved me. Vesna leaned into him, feeling Edmund's small hand pat her cheek, feeling Calder's heart beat steadily against her shoulder. We saved each other, she said. Outside, the moors stretched endless and wild, no longer oppressive, no longer lonely. Somewhere in the village, church bells rang. Somewhere in the sky, a hawk circled, riding the wind. And in the great house called Thornhaven, a family stood together, whole and happy and finally home. Because some storms were worth weathering, some choices were worth fighting for, and some loves, the real ones, the impossible ones, the ones that bloomed from rejection and demanded everything you had to give, those were worth everything. Thank you for staying with Vesna and Calder until the very end. Their story began with rejection, a family who saw her as the unwanted one, a duke who took her when no one else would. But in truth, they always had a choice. They chose to see each other, to fight for each other, to believe that love was worth more than duty, reputation, or fear. And if you are not subscribed yet, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell, because there are more stories waiting. More impossible loves. More hard-won choices. More moments that remind us why we believe in happily ever after. Thank you for being here. You are the reason these stories exist,